What if progress isn't always a straight line forward? What if, scattered across the last 2 centuries, there were moments when the future briefly appeared and then quietly slipped away? Not in a dramatic puff of smoke, not always through villains or secret meetings. Sometimes simply through indifference, through fear, through the fragile way human memory works. It often begins the same way: a lone inventor in a garage, a scientist with ink-stained hands, a dreamer convinced that one small breakthrough could ease the weight of the world, a machine that runs cleaner, a material that refuses to burn, a discovery that feels for a moment like a door opening, and then silence. The story we tell ourselves is comforting, that history is a steady climb, that knowledge accumulates like stones stacked carefully upward, that what is true and useful always survives. But history is not that tidy. Sometimes inventions vanish, blueprints disappear, ideas fall out of favor. A world-changing prototype becomes a footnote. A promising experiment is abandoned because it doesn't fit the time, the market, or the imagination of those in power. And sometimes what is lost is not just technology, but possibility. In old archives and half-forgotten newspaper clippings, there are echoes of strange creations: engines that claimed to sip water instead of gasoline, machines that could transmit power through open air, ancient devices pulled from shipwrecks that seemed too complex for their age. Some of these stories are real. Some are exaggerated. Some live somewhere in the uncertain space between myth and misunderstanding. But all of them reveal something deeply human: our longing to believe that the world could be different, that somewhere, someone already solved the problems that still haunt us: energy, illness, scarcity, war, and that the solutions were misplaced along the way. It's tempting, of course, to frame these tales as battles between genius and shadowy forces, to imagine history as a locked room full of stolen secrets. But the truth is often quieter. Sometimes an invention disappears because the inventor dies too soon. Sometimes because the world isn't ready. Sometimes because institutions resist change, not out of evil, but inertia. And sometimes because the future is expensive and the present is profitable. Tonight, we begin a journey through these strange gaps in the timeline, not to prove conspiracies, not to declare hidden truths, but to explore the fragile relationship between discovery and forgetting. Because whether these inventions were suppressed, abandoned, misunderstood, or simply lost, they ask the same haunting question: how many doors have we almost opened? In the chapters ahead, we will meet dreamers who challenged the limits of their era. We will walk through laboratories reduced to ash, through ancient ruins holding impossible machines, through moments when history seemed to hesitate. Each story is less about forbidden knowledge and more about the human cost of losing it. Progress is not guaranteed. Memory is not permanent. And the future, it turns out, can be surprisingly easy to erase. So let us begin, not with certainty, but with wonder, because somewhere in the dust of yesterday, there may still be sparks waiting to be seen again. What if the greatest inventions aren't ahead of us, but behind us, whispering from the dark? It started with a simple dune buggy, a man in overalls, and a jug of tap water. In the 1980s, Stanley Meyer wasn't a scientist in a lab coat. He didn't have a prestigious grant or a university title. He had a dream and a garage in Ohio. Meyer claimed to have invented something quietly revolutionary: a car that ran not on gasoline, but on water. More specifically, a process that used electrical pulses to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, then burned the hydrogen as fuel. The idea wasn't entirely new, but Meyer's execution was different. Elegant, scalable, supposedly real. He called it the water fuel cell. He bolted it to a modified dune buggy and drove across the country using nothing but fresh H2O. At least, that's how the story goes. If true, it would change everything. Oil companies, governments, and automobile giants had spent decades building a world dependent on combustion. But here was a backyard tinkerer with an invention that defied all of it. Clean, cheap, available from any kitchen faucet. The implications were staggering. And then, like a spark in a storm, Stanley Meyer was gone. In 1998, he met with potential investors over dinner. He took a sip of cranberry juice, clutched his chest, staggered into the parking lot, and collapsed. His last reported words, "They poisoned me." His death was ruled a brain aneurysm. His patents contested. His prototype missing. His workshop emptied. What remains today are fragments. A grainy video of the dune buggy rolling across a field. A handful of interviews. A community of believers and skeptics locked in an endless tug-of-war over what he truly achieved. Was it real? Was it a hoax? Or was it something in between? An idea too radical for the systems we've built. In a world increasingly desperate for clean energy, Meyer's story still echoes. Some see him as a prophet silenced. Others a cautionary tale about the line between science and fantasy. But perhaps the more important question is not whether the car worked. It's why we're still chasing the same solution 40 years later. Why, with all our progress, we still struggle to imagine a world without oil. Stanley Meyer wasn't the first to claim a breakthrough, and he wouldn't be the last to die in obscurity. But he left behind a symbol, a water-fueled car, rolling across a sunlit road, whispering of a future we might have had. Inventions don't always need conspiracies to disappear. Sometimes, all it takes is silence. So we ask, if Meyer's machine was possible, why didn't the world rise up to protect it? And if it wasn't, why does his story still burn so brightly in the minds of those searching for hope? Imagine a car so beloved its owners wept as it was towed away. In the 1990s, on the sun-baked streets of California, a quiet revolution hummed to life. It wasn't flashy. It didn't roar. It glided, smooth, silent, electric. It was called the EV1. Developed by General Motors, the EV1 was one of the first mass-produced electric vehicles in the United States. It was sleek, futuristic, and ran without a single drop of gasoline. Early adopters adored it. Some said it felt like driving the future, but that future was short-lived. Despite glowing reviews and a growing waitlist, GM halted the program. And then, in an act that still stings decades later, they repossessed nearly every car. Not sold, not recalled, repossessed. Some drivers begged to keep their leases. Others offered to buy the cars outright. GM refused. Tow trucks arrived under cover of night. Clean, working EV1s were hauled to a desert lot and crushed, silently erased from the landscape they once promised to transform. Why? Officially, GM cited cost, infrastructure, a lack of demand. Unofficially, many pointed to pressure from oil companies and parts manufacturers. Industries built on combustion, routine maintenance, and fossil fuels. Because electric cars don't need oil changes, or spark plugs, or gas stations. And that makes them dangerous, not technically, but economically. In the end, only a few EV1s survived, stripped of engines and rendered undrivable, locked away in museums as if they were artifacts from another timeline. A glimpse of what might have been. Today, electric vehicles are back, stronger than ever, but they return not as pioneers, but as inheritors of an idea that was once given breath and then strangled. The story of the EV1 is not just about technology, it's about how quickly a company can turn on its own creation, about how a machine that worked perfectly could be declared unworkable, and how easily the future can be stalled by the inertia of the present. So we wonder, what does it mean when a corporation destroys its own innovation? And how many times must we rediscover the same solution before we are ready to accept it? It began with a flash of light in the mind of a man who saw the world differently. Nikola Tesla, the forgotten architect of the modern age, spent his later years alone in a New York hotel, feeding pigeons and sketching wild ideas in the margins of borrowed notepads. Among his final obsessions was a vision so radical it sounded like science fiction, an invisible weapon of unimaginable precision. He called it Teleforce. The press would later dub it the Death Ray. Tesla imagined a particle beam weapon that could destroy enemy aircraft from hundreds of miles away, without a single soldier leaving the ground. A wall of energy, a defensive shield so powerful it would make war obsolete. He offered it to world leaders, not as a tool of conquest, but of deterrence, peace through invincibility. They weren't ready. In January of 1943, Tesla died in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel. Within hours, federal agents entered his room. They seized every notebook, every diagram, every scrap of paper. Officially, they were searching for sensitive technologies during wartime. Unofficially, they were looking for a man's mind in a briefcase. The contents were never fully revealed. The death ray, if it ever existed, vanished into the vaults of history. Some say it was never real. Others believe it was buried too disruptive, too untamable, a vision ahead of its time, trapped between the paranoia of war and the limits of human understanding. But the more enduring mystery is not the machine itself, it's the man. Tesla believed in a world connected by energy, light, and harmony. He dreamed of wireless power, free for all, of inventions that lifted humanity rather than divided it. And yet, as the century marched forward, the world chose wires, meters, patents, and profits. His name faded, eclipsed by those who turned invention into empire. Today, we resurrect him in documentaries and murals, a kind of electric saint. But the questions remain. What did we lose when we dismissed the dreamer in the hotel room? And if peace can be built not through strength, but through genius, why do we so often bury the blueprint? What if the light in your living room is dimmer, not by design, but by decision? In 1924, in a smoke-filled room in Geneva, a secret pact was forged. A group of powerful men, representing the world's largest light bulb companies, met to finalize something extraordinary. Not a new invention, but a limit. They called themselves the Phoebus Cartel. Their mission? To reduce the lifespan of the common light bulb to 1,000 hours. Before this meeting, bulbs could burn for decades. There are records, still burning in fire stations and basements today, that defy our understanding of durability. But the cartel saw too clearly what others ignored. A bulb that lasts forever is bad for business. So they set a standard, not of excellence, but of obsolescence. Companies that made bulbs that lasted too long were fined. Engineers were ordered to improve failure rates. Efficiency was sacrificed for profit, and a slow flicker of planned obsolescence began to seep into the design of everyday life. And it worked. Sales soared. Replacements became routine. The idea that things should break, wear out, expire, that idea spread far beyond lighting. To toasters, printers, phones, cars, the Phoebus Cartel may have dimmed just one bulb, but it lit the way for a century of throwaway culture. And though the cartel disbanded decades ago, its spirit lingers in boardrooms and product roadmaps everywhere. The average consumer rarely questions why things don't last. We shrug when a phone slows down, when a fridge fails just past warranty, when another light burns out too soon. But what if we didn't accept it? What if we remembered that permanence was once possible? There's a light bulb in Livermore, California, that's been glowing since 1901. Over 100 years. Quiet, unyielding. A tiny protest against a century of calculated decay. So ask yourself, how many things in our lives are built to fail? And how different would our world look if the brightest ideas hadn't been dimmed on purpose? It sounded like science fiction, a machine that shattered cancer cells with nothing but sound and light. In 1934, Royal Raymond Rife stood before a microscope unlike any the world had seen. He claimed his device could magnify living viruses in real time without staining or distortion. But more than that, he believed he had found a frequency that could destroy disease. He called them mortal oscillatory rates. Every pathogen, he said, vibrated at a natural frequency. Find the right pitch, like a soprano shattering a wine glass, and you could eliminate disease without drugs, without surgery. Early reports were astonishing. In one quietly documented trial, 14 out of 16 cancer patients were said to have gone into full remission. No side effects, no pain, just resonance. But then, things changed. Rife's lab burned down in a mysterious fire. Doctors who supported him were threatened with the loss of their licenses. His research was ridiculed, his machines confiscated, his name erased from medical journals. By the 1950s, Rife was a forgotten man, his technology dismissed as pseudoscience, his legacy buried beneath lawsuits and silence. What remains are fragments, photographs of strange glass tubes, grainy interviews, homemade reconstructions of a machine no one can fully replicate. To some, he was a quack. To others, a genius silenced too soon. But whether his invention truly worked is almost beside the point. Because what's undeniable is how quickly and aggressively the system turned against him. Not with better science, but with fear. Fear of change, fear of disruption. Rife didn't ask for billions. He didn't patent his frequencies. He wanted a better way. And for that, he became a ghost. Today, the idea of treating disease with frequency is returning under new names. Focused ultrasound, bioresonance, electromagnetic therapies. But Rife, the man who may have sparked it all, is rarely mentioned. So we are left to wonder, how do we measure the value of a silenced voice? And what cures have we forgotten because they came from the wrong person at the wrong time with the wrong kind of truth? It looked like a toy, a white egg, a plastic shell, a paste mixed in a kitchen. But what it did should have been impossible. In the 1990s, Morris Ward, a former hairdresser turned amateur chemist, unveiled something that stunned the scientific world. A heat-resistant material so powerful it could shield a raw egg from the fury of a blowtorch and leave it uncooked. He called it Starlite. At demonstrations, it defied 10,000-degree heat. Military scientists, aerospace engineers, television hosts, everyone watched in disbelief as the substance absorbed temperatures that would vaporize steel. NASA showed interest. So did defense contractors, but Maurice refused to sell. He distrusted corporations, feared the formula would be stolen, misused, buried. So he held the secret close, locked in his mind and his private notebooks. Offers came, some public, others whispered. Maurice walked away from all of them, and in 2011 he died. With him, the recipe vanished. There are samples, a few surviving applications, but no one has been able to replicate the precise mixture of Starlite, the polymer that refused to burn. It could have changed everything: space travel, firefighting, aviation safety, a material that made the unthinkable survivable. Instead, it became a legend, a cautionary tale of a man who discovered a miracle and then refused to share it with the world. Some call him selfish, others a hero who defied the machinery of power. But maybe the story isn't about greed or secrecy at all. Maybe it's about trust. Maurice Ward didn't trust the world with his invention. And in some ways, he was right not to. How many other breakthroughs have been bought, shelved, or erased to protect existing markets? But his decision left us all with a haunting question. Is it better to risk losing a great discovery to theft or to time? And how many fires must still burn before we learn how to hold light without destroying it? It rose from the earth like a mechanical myth, tall, silent, and strangely elegant. In the 1950s, Wilhelm Reich drove into the Maine countryside with a strange device strapped to the back of a truck, long metal tubes aimed skyward, buckets of what he called orgone energy layered beneath. He called it the Cloudbuster, and according to eyewitnesses, it made the sky weep. Reich claimed his machine could draw rain from clear skies, bend weather patterns, even tame droughts. Farmers watched in disbelief as clouds formed and rain fell, just as predicted. He wasn't a meteorologist. He was a psychoanalyst turned fringe physicist, obsessed with a mysterious life force he believed pulsed through all matter, orgone. To Reich, orgone explained everything: health, storms, emotion, even the cosmos. But to authorities, he was dangerous. Not because his machine didn't work, but because some feared it might. The FDA launched a campaign against him. Not a debate, a crackdown. They burned his books in parking lot bonfires, seized his equipment, prosecuted him for contempt of court when he refused to stop his research. In 1957, Reich died in federal prison. His Cloudbusters vanished. His theories became taboo. And the idea of weather control, once alive in the public imagination, slipped into the realm of fantasy and conspiracy. Yet the core idea has never truly died. Today, governments experiment with cloud seeding. Satellites monitor atmospheric pulses. Whispers of geoengineering drift through scientific journals and late-night forums alike. But Reich's vision was different. He didn't seek to dominate nature, but to harmonize with it. He believed the weather was an extension of the human soul, and that by understanding energy, we could heal both. He may have been wrong, or too far ahead, or simply unwilling to speak the language of the institutions that judged him. But the sight of rain falling over a dry field because a man pointed metal tubes at the sky, that image lingers, and it asks something of us. What if controlling the weather wasn't science fiction? And what would we do with that power? if we ever truly held it in our hands. It didn't make a sound when it bent. In 1941, Henry Ford stood beside a strange-looking car. It wasn't glossy metal or cold steel. It was smooth, light, built almost entirely from hemp. Ford called it the car of the future. The body panels were made of plant-based plastics, 10 times stronger than steel, resistant to dents, and dramatically lighter. When he struck it with a sledgehammer, the hammer bounced off. Even more revolutionary was the engine. It was designed to run on hemp fuel, an early biofuel made from fermented agricultural waste and vegetable oils, grown from the soil, returned to the soil. A circular economy before we had a word for it. The oil industry was not amused. Neither, it seems, were lawmakers. Within years, the United States launched a sweeping campaign against hemp. The plant was reclassified alongside narcotics. Farming it became nearly impossible. Research funding evaporated, and Ford's prototype was quietly retired, its parts scattered, its plans shelved. Today, it exists only in black and white photographs. A car that could have transformed manufacturing, farming, and fossil fuels, gone before it had a chance to take the road. Some say the war on hemp was about drugs. Others say it was about money, oil, plastics, timber. What's clear is that the strongest, cleanest car ever built didn't vanish because it failed. It vanished because it worked, because it threatened industries not yet ready to be threatened, and because sometimes innovation isn't about what we can build, but what we're allowed to. Decades later, we've come full circle. Electric cars, plant-based materials, biofuels, sustainability, all echoing the quiet experiment Henry Ford rolled into his field almost a century ago. So we ask, how many breakthroughs are buried in history? Not because they lacked potential, but because they lacked permission. It was said to see time, not metaphorically, but literally. In the 1960s, Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a Benedictine monk and respected musicologist, made a remarkable claim. Hidden deep within the walls of the Vatican, he said, was a device unlike anything the world had seen. He called it the Chronovisor. According to Ernetti, the Chronovisor was a kind of time-viewing machine, a screen that allowed users to witness past events by tuning into residual energy patterns still echoing through the fabric of space-time. He said he saw ancient Rome, watched lost Greek plays performed live, and even glimpsed the crucifixion of Christ. It wasn't time travel exactly. It was observation, a cosmic playback. He wasn't alone either. Ernetti claimed the project involved a secret team of scientists, including Nobel Prize winner Enrico Fermi. Together, they supposedly assembled the device using principles of quantum resonance and electromagnetic harmonics. The church, he said, eventually dismantled it. It was too powerful, too dangerous. The temptation to alter history or verify prophecy was simply too great. So the machine was taken apart, the blueprints locked away, and the Chronovisor became legend. Skeptics dismissed the tale as fantasy. No photos, no hardware, no proof. But then a photograph surfaced, a blurry image said to depict Christ on the cross, captured from the Chronovisor. It was later traced to a 19th century statue, a forgery perhaps, or a misdirection. Still, the story refused to die, because it speaks to something deeper, our longing to witness truth, to know, not through books or hearsay, but through sight, through direct experience. What if we could truly see history, not just read about wars and revolutions, but feel the dust in the streets, hear the breath of the past, watch decisions made, not imagined? The Chronovisor, real or not, is a mirror, It reflects our hunger for certainty in an age drowning in ambiguity. But it also asks a quieter question. If we could look into the past without illusion, would we like what we see? Or are some truths lost for a reason? It was shaped like a bell and glowed with a violet light. In the final days of World War II, as cities burned and armies collapsed, whispers began to circulate about a secret Nazi project hidden deep in the forests of what is now Poland. A device so strange, so beyond the imagination of conventional warfare, it would take decades before its name resurfaced in the public eye. They called it Die Glocke, the bell. Witnesses described a metallic object, suspended in a chamber lined with thick ceramic tiles. Inside, a swirling, heavy liquid, codenamed Serum 525, was spun at incredible speeds. The machine emitted high-frequency vibrations, strange radiation. Some claimed it defied gravity. Others said it warped time. And then it disappeared. After the war, Allied forces scoured German research facilities under Operation Paperclip, collecting scientists, blueprints, and technology, rockets, jets, nuclear theory. But the bell and its lead engineer, SS Officer Hans Kammler, vanished without a trace. What little we know comes from fragments, declassified documents, accounts from Polish researchers, and the eerie ruins of a concrete structure called the Henge, a test rig that some believe once held the bell suspended in the air. The story straddles the edge of science and myth. Anti-gravity, time manipulation, a gateway to a physics the world wasn't ready for. Skeptics see conspiracy theory. Enthusiasts see suppressed genius. Historians search for evidence, but the truth remains elusive. Still, the bell endures in imagination because it challenges our assumptions. What if the real breakthroughs of the 20th century weren't just atomic, but gravitational? What if hidden in a bunker under the fog of war, someone cracked a code that modern science still hasn't rediscovered? And what does it say about us that even now, we're not sure whether to be afraid of that possibility or hopeful? Sometimes, the past doesn't vanish. It echoes just out of reach, like a bell no one hears anymore, still ringing through the silence of forgotten forests. It was found beneath the sea, weathered, rusted, silent. In 1901, sponge divers off the coast of Antikythera, a small Greek island, discovered the remnants of an ancient shipwreck. Among the broken statues and amphorae was a lump of corroded bronze, no larger than a shoebox. At first, it seemed like nothing, just metal and gears. But when archaeologists examined it more closely, they were stunned. It was a machine. Now known as the Antikythera Mechanism, this 2,000-year-old device is considered the world's first analog computer. Its gears, levers, and dials could predict lunar cycles, solar eclipses, and planetary alignments with breathtaking precision. All built by hand, before the fall of Rome, before the rise of science, before we believed such complexity was possible. Nothing like it would appear again for over 1,000 years. The mechanism rewrote what we thought we knew about the ancient world. It suggested a level of technical sophistication that seemed out of place, even impossible. How could ancient Greeks, armed with no electricity, no precision tools, build something so advanced? Some historians now believe it was just one of many, that ancient engineers may have been on the cusp of an industrial revolution, halted not by lack of knowledge, but by the collapse of empire. When the libraries burned, when wars swept across the Mediterranean, machines like this vanished, not only from history books, but from memory itself. We often think of progress as inevitable, that one invention builds upon the next in a steady climb toward the future. But the Antikythera mechanism reminds us of something else, that knowledge can be lost, that entire ages of brilliance can be forgotten beneath the waves, and that we may not be the first to stand on the threshold of the stars, only the latest. So we are left with this. What other wonders have we overlooked? Not because they never existed, but because we've forgotten how to recognize them when they resurface. It glowed red when the candlelight hit it just right. At first glance, the Lycurgus Cup looks like a beautiful artifact, an ancient Roman chalice crafted in the 4th century CE, etched with myth and legend. But when light shines through it, something extraordinary happens. The glass changes color. In normal light, it appears a dull green. But when illuminated from behind, it transforms into a luminous red. Not from paint, not from trickery, from something far more sophisticated, nanotechnology. Modern scientists were stunned to discover that the glass was infused with tiny particles of gold and silver, ground down to the nanoscale. These particles scatter light in precise ways, creating the cup's magical glow. What's even more remarkable is that this technique, engineering materials at the atomic level, would not be rediscovered until the 20th century. The Romans, it seems, had mastered a science we thought belonged to our own time. And yet the knowledge vanished. No manuals, no replication. The secret of the Lycurgus Cup disappeared as empires fell and artisans died. For centuries, no one knew such a thing was even possible. Today we speak of nanotech with awe, as if it were born in a clean lab under fluorescent lights. But the truth is, someone, long ago, with bare hands and fire, discovered it first. It makes you wonder, how many other ancient objects hold secrets hidden beneath their surfaces? How much forgotten brilliance lies not in grand monuments, but in small things, bowls, trinkets, pigments, tools? The Lycurgus Cup is a quiet miracle, a reminder that beauty and science are not separate, and that the line between past and future is sometimes no thicker than a layer of glass. So we ask, when we gaze at the artifacts of history, are we seeing them clearly, or are we still waiting for the right light to shine through? It ends, as it began, with a question. What if the future is not something we move toward, but something we've already passed by? Across these chapters, we've followed stories not just of lost inventions, but of lost courage, lost memory, lost imagination, a car that ran on water, a microscope that could see what others refused to believe, a cup that glowed with secrets, and a machine that predicted the stars. Each tale, taken alone, is curious. Together, they form a pattern, not of conspiracy, but of caution. We are not the first generation to dream boldly. We are not the first to glimpse solutions shimmering just beyond reach. But time and again, those solutions were brushed aside by profit, by fear, by disbelief. This is not a documentary about technology. It's about forgetting. Forgetting that a better way once existed. Forgetting that knowledge is fragile, that progress is not permanent, that discovery without protection is often just a whisper, lost in the wind. We live in a world that celebrates innovation, but quietly, it punishes disruption. It rewards safety, predictability, comfort. And when something arrives that dares to rewrite the rules, too often we look away. We let the oil flow, let the patents lapse, let the dreamers die in obscurity. And yet, these stories endure, passed like folklore between engineers, tinkerers, skeptics, believers. Because deep down, we all feel it. That tug in the gut that says, maybe we were meant for something more. Not more apps, not more upgrades, more wonder, more freedom, more possibility. We are surrounded by questions we once answered and then buried. And perhaps the greatest question of all is this: what would it take to remember, to truly remember, to unearth not just the machines, but the spirit that made them, to choose curiosity over certainty, to listen again to the old, the strange, the impossible, because maybe, just maybe, the future isn't waiting ahead. Maybe it's calling from behind, and it's up to us to turn around, to dig, to listen, to remember, before it's forgotten again.